I'm AaronBirr. I'll be presenting my capstone project today on redlining in education, investigating the long-lasting impacts of historical housing policies in Hennepin County. So a little background on myself and the reason behind the project. So formerly I was a teacher in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota. I'm interested in understanding social systems, particularly around educational outcomes. So in addition to working in the study area, my family is from Northeast Minneapolis. My great-grandparents established their home in Northeast in the 1920s, raised my grandparents and my parents as well. And in this research, I've actually found that they lived and grew up in a D grade area based on the Hulk grading system. And so for those reasons, that's kind of why I set out to do this project. And I wanted to answer three questions. First, what factors kind of contribute to low educational attainment? Does it vary across space? And is there a relationship to the Hulk grade areas? Um, and so this kind of builds on the achievement gap and the Hulk grades, and I'll talk a little bit more about those next. The study area is Hennepin County, located in Minnesota. It's the state's most populous county, and it includes the city of Minneapolis and several surrounding suburbs. The county has the most diverse demographic profile in the state. White residents make up the largest portion of the population, um, but historically has seen a lot of different immigrants move in and out of Minneapolis. In recent years, the county's experienced growth in refugee populations from East Africa, Central America, and Southeast Asia. And there's this contrast between the suburban areas and the urban areas as far as affluence and inequality. And in the city, particularly, there's non-white and poor white populations face persistent disparities in education, employment, and housing. And these inequities have roots in historical policies. So just to start briefly, back in 1828, Fort Snelling, which is the southeastern or lower right part of the screen there, did the first sort of survey plot of the area. And it was the kind of the first or one of the early ways that um, the government and the settlers um, sort of restricted access to the people that were already living there, which were the Dakota people. And you can see on the map that that is largely the blue and green areas that eventually become the Hulk grade areas. Uh, After that, between the 1860s and 1900s, you had a lot of European immigrants and Black Americans from the South started coming to Minnesota. And a lot of the reaction to that, or one of the housing reactions, was the development of racial covenants. And these excluded Black Americans and other minority groups from specific neighborhoods. The covenants prohibited property sales to non-white individuals, um, Black Americans, Jews, and other ethnic minorities. And so by the 1920s and 30s, these policies really concentrated specific groups of people in specific areas. And then in the 1930s, in response to the Great Depression, the whole Homeowners Loan Corporation created maps, and the whole grading system was established that had these discriminatory practices based on race, economic status, and ethnicity. And so we see these sort of social, cultural, and economic boundaries today are really similar to what they were in the 1930s. And these red line neighborhoods still struggle with lower property values, limited access to resources, and persistent disparities in education, wealth, and healthcare. Let's talk a little bit here about the education part of it. So I'm looking at the achievement gap, which is a gap in academic performance among students from different racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. These differences are outcomes measured by either standardized test scores, graduation rates, or college readiness. And in Minnesota, these gaps are notably pronounced between white students and students of color, as well as high income and low income students. And there's research coming out that there's this growing disparity between rural and urban populations. And this study in particular is looking at Minneapolis, in part because it lines up with the Holt grades, which is kind of one of the questions I wanted to answer. Um, but in general, it's going to look at graduation, because research shows that high school dropouts face serious challenges later in life, especially for people who've already faced disadvantages. And for this study, I'm defining low educational attainment as 25 years or older with education less than high school and no GED or equivalency at the census tract level. Like I said, we're focusing on Minneapolis to compare those Hulk boundaries. So the three questions here are, what factors contribute to students not completing high school? Does it vary across the space? And how does it relate to the Hulk grades? And so for the methods, the data used were shapefiles, um, kind of pulled together from the Institute for Social Research. It combined census tract as well as the Hulk grades and made them fit with 2020 census tract shapefiles. And then using the Census Bureau for either the census or the American Community Survey estimates. The variables I have, the dependent variable is low educational attainment, and then the independent variables are below poverty, unemployment, disability, no internet access, and then four or more people in a household. And the tools that I used were the exploratory regression analysis, the ordinary least squares, and then the geographically weighted regression analysis. And you can see the workflow there on the right. So first, kind of taking a look at the exploratory regression analysis. The point here is to one, choose variables that made sense based on literature review and connections to education, and determine if the independent variables are important to the dependent variables. So this is a passing model that I was able to get from running the analysis. The adjusted R square is telling us that the variables explain the dependent variable about 70% of the time. We're looking for a low AICC as a model of good fit. The JB is a measure of bias, so it's not skewed. And then the KBP is an indicator of non-stationarity that we'll talk about later. And then the VIF is a measure of redundancy, and the spatial autocorrelation is a measure of the observed values and the predicted values. Um, and so all of these things pass, and we see the significance by the stars by each variable as well as the positive and negative relationship. And so from those, I moved on to the ordinary least squares to again just kind of establish that model as far as being a good fit and whether it was significant. And so looking at those uh, variables, I kind of saw household income as having a kind of low coefficient, meaning that it didn't seem to be uh, connecting really strongly to low educational attainment. And so I removed that one and ran it again. And this was how I got to the five final variables to do the um, further analysis. And you can see that the significance there in the probabilities, the coefficients, both positive and negative, and then the VIF for redundancy. And then just a couple other statistics here, just trying to determine again, if it's a good fit and whether or not it's a good indicator for the GWR. And so you kind of have to follow a little bit of instructions here. So um, looking at the statistics, When the joint F and the conchner are significant, we want to use the joint walled to determine significance. And so joint F and the conchner are both significant and the joint walled significant, so that's good. And then if the KB, or again, if the JB is not significant, then it's not skewed. So we see that here. And then the KB is also um, not significant, which means that, or sorry, is significant, which indicates that it's non-stationary. So this could, we'll get to that. But it's a good indicator of the GWR. And then also doing the Moran's eye here, looking at the clustering. The observed clustering is not random, and so this is another indicator that there's some sort of spatial process here, and also kind of reinforces the idea of moving on to the GWR. So here's the GWR. On the left, we have a map of the residuals. And for this to be good, we want them to be random. We can see that in the spatial autocorrelation report, and we want the results to also have a normal distribution. We see that on the right there as well. So this is a good, so the variables and fit well with this model, and so we're able to kind of trust the results. And so here we have the predicted number of people with low educational attainment based on those variables. The darker shades are a higher population of people, and the lighter shades, the lighter green, are less people. And so we can start to kind of see where people are experiencing low educational attainment based on those values. And I have a table there of the parcels of the Holt grades, A, B, C, and D. Um, Oops, and we'll talk a little bit more about that further on. But just wanted to go through each coefficient. This is the coefficient of below poverty. So again, you can see the strength of the relationship, and the areas that they're stronger or weaker, or positive and negative. You can also see the coefficient of unemployment as it relates to low educational attainment um, with any disability, no internet access, and then four or more people within the household. So again, each of those we can kind of look at and determine, is the relationship positive or negative, and then where. And this is kind of a good way to um, enact any sort of like policies, for example. And then we want to kind of look at, how does it align with the Hulk grades? So I have that predicted low educational attainment, and then four maps that kind of show how it lines up with each area. And we can kind of see that the A area is on the left and the D area is on the right. And the B, C, and D areas tend to have more people with low educational attainment. But you also notice that the A areas have smaller amount of parcels. So I wanted to kind of take a look at that a little further. And so what I did was just kind of ran some summary statistics about this and wanted to say what percentage of the population in those census tracts are predicted to have low educational attainment. And so you can see here that we have the darker shades of red have a higher population of low educational attainment, and the lighter shades have a lower prediction of low educational attainment. And so again, we wanted to kind of see, how does this compare to the Holt grades? And so divide it up again. And, this sort of, again, visualizes the data by the grade area. And you can kind of start to see the pattern as well, that the D, C, and B areas tend to have a higher percentage of population with low educational attainment, whereas the A areas generally have a lower level of low educational attainment. Um, and so I also wanted to kind of take a look at, how does this line up with any ideas around race. And so the map on the left is um, educational attainment, and then non-white population. And the darker shades indicate a combination. The purple is high levels of low educational attainment and high levels of non-white. And the map on the right is on the opposite, low levels of education and population of white. And so you can still kind of see that there is this connection between low educational attainment, race, and the Hulk grades here in Minneapolis. Um, so again, and then just kind of to wrap it up, um, historical segregation through the policies like Hulk grading still show that connection. The strengths of the relationships vary across, Hennepin County or Minneapolis, but tend to line up with those D-rated areas. Can kind of look at policy interventions, looking at those variables to enact a policy for a certain area, for a certain group of people. Um, and again, just to reinforce that there's that connection between low educational attainment and those variables. And then there are some limitations to the study that, I could probably answer during the questions. Um, but that is it. So we're ready for any questions if you have them.